You're listening to The Sacred Sofa, a podcast that explores all things theology and therapy. My name is Grace Brown. I'm a registered psychotherapist, certified Canadian counselor, and owner of Journey with Grace Counseling Services.
And I'm Brad Watson, pastor of Nexus Church and author of the book, A Path Called Compelling. Welcome to The Sacred Sofa. Welcome back, Sacred Sofa listeners. Grace and I are joined again by our special guest, Suzanne Trotman, who is a registered psychotherapist in Ontario, and she is the owner of Winds of Change Therapeutic and Consulting Services. Hello, Suzanne.
Hi, welcome. Thank you.
In our first episode, Suzanne, you brought to our attention one of life's unavoidable storylines, that of tragedy, right? And the grief that comes with it. So last episode, we explored what grief actually is, and hint, right? It's not something that you get over. We talked about why it shows up in far more places than death alone, and how poorly most of us have been trained to respond to it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we also learned with you, Suzanne, that your professional work is actually inseparable from your profound and personal losses. And that, of course, fuels the passion you have to support grievers and to give non-grievers the right tools to support those who are grieving. And so we thank you for being here again and for also sharing so vulnerably of your personal stories.
Yes, it's good to be back to continue our grief talk as the holidays approach. To look for ways to deconstruct what we were told and learn the language of grief for both grievers and grief supporters alike. My lived experience in grief was started when my late husband passed in 2009 after a battle of colon cancer, and my world is what I say fell off its axis. And I immersed myself in widows groups. That was a lifeline for me to make sense of the loss. And when I was emotionally ready, I started a 7-year journey of studies that led me to psychotherapy. In 2022, after my oldest son died suddenly of an enlarged heart, I did additional grief training to better support myself and others. And grief psychoeducation and helping others become more proficient in grief is one of my passions.
Absolutely. And it's a profound story. And again, thank you for sharing it with us. Now, last week, we talked a little bit about this, but I thought before we get into some specifics, maybe you could help us again distinguish between three things: loss, grief, and mourning, because, sometimes a person like me can use those interchangeably, but I know you're pretty careful not to. So can you help us with those three things?
Absolutely. So loss usually is like the stem. So, and loss is defined as tangible loss, where there's a death of a loved one, there is divorce or loss of a house to fire. Those are tangible losses. And just some examples: intangible loss could be loss after breakdown of a relationship, loss of trust, loss of control over your body, like during sexual abuse or bankruptcy. Those are intangible losses. Now, when it comes to grief, grief is the inward response or experience to loss to death, which is what we're focusing today on. So it's our thoughts or feelings that affect us mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So grief is as individual as our DNA or fingerprint. Mourning is the outward expression of that grief. So that could look like crying, talking about our loved ones, telling stories, rituals like funerals, celebrations of life, events, visiting the grave, memory books, keeping old traditions and integrating new ones, planting memorial gardens, releasing balloons, grief walks, memorial pillows or ornaments, creating art, poetry. And I want to just quickly mention there's the MAD initiative. That this time of year we see the police on the on ramps at on the 401, and that actually came out of mourning for that mom who lost her child. So these are benchmarks of mourning, and mourning is what you do as an outward expression to an inward state. What's inside will show up. So Grace, you would have wondered about normal grief, right? Like, what are some of the things that show up as normal grief? And so some of the benchmarks of normal grief: crying, sobbing, sleep patterns change, insomnia or too much sleep, lack of energy, brain fog, changes in appetite, over or under eating, weight loss or weight gain, withdrawal, isolation, feelings of anger, guilt, loneliness, depression, emptiness, sadness, yet experiencing moments of joy and laughter. Talking about the loved one who died, maybe more than what people expect.
Mm,
But let's remember that grief is as unique as our DNA, so it shows up very differently for others.
hmm. And it's important to know that each person is going to grieve differently. So it's not helpful to kind of have this formula where it's like you should be dot dot dot, because that could be very harmful for people because might feel like they're doing it wrong, using air quotes here. So
Mm.
that's good to know what people can expect.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I know you've mentioned before, Suzanne, you don't love the idea of grief as a journey, which is interesting because I hear that used a lot, right? But you talk about it more like learning a language. Could you unpack that and why that metaphor maybe better serves
Hmm.
this whole grief process?
Mm,
For sure. And when I first entered grief support, that was the language journey. And I remember one of the girls, she was like, I hate that word. And I could
Mm,
not understand why she hated it because I'm like, we're on this journey of grief.
mhm,
However, imagine the three of us are on a journey or a trip together and we're all speaking a different language.
mm,
Think
mm,
about that.
mm,
So none of us can understand the other person. How do you think that trip will turn out? So think about that for a minute. However, if we're all proficient in the same language, we could better communicate and
mm,
support each other. So that's one part of that. So journey at some, and the other part of that is that a journey at some point ends. Grief does not end. It's a
mm,
mm,
mhm,
lifelong event. And so if we learn the language of grief, the syntax and the nuances that enable us to become more proficient in the grief for life, especially if we keep using that language, we are then able to apply that concept of the language of grief, and it leads to a better understanding for the griever of their own needs and how to integrate
mm,
the laws. And that grief language proficiency enables the non-griever to better support the griever. And so the goal for both sides is to become more proficient in the language of grief.
mhm.
mm.
I can
Wow.
imagine a trip with not with us not understanding the same language. It'll start will
Yeah.
be awkward, and then I think it'll
Yes,
go rapidly go to frustrating.
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's how
Yes.
grievers feel. Yes.
Mm,
Mm,
mhm.
So as we think about non-grievers and supportive grievers, you listed a lot of things that well-meaning people can say, but that actually lands painfully. So
mhm.
I'm curious about why do you think people say these things, and what are they actually trying to do?
Mm,
So so the non-grievers or grief supporters, they say things that are grounded in the myths that we were socialized to hear, practice, and believe.
Mm,
And usually it's their way, and I'm guilty of that as well, is their way of intellectualizing the loss,
mm,
mm,
making sense of it, right? But the truth is, non-grievers just want to help. And
mm,
so
mhm,
when the proficiency of grief is mediocre, then it will show up and people will say things like, don't cry. Your loved one wouldn't want that. You'll get over this soon. You are young. You can still remarry. I know how you feel. We watch that because you really don't. You can get a
mm,
cat or a dog. Your loved one led a full life. Don't be sad. At least you can have other children. Be strong. The others need you. Don't fall apart. Make
mm.
sure you work through the stages of grief. Your dad is no longer in pain. God needed another angel. God doesn't give you more than you can bear. Why
mhm,
are you always talking about them? I
Mm,
mhm,
understand how you feel. It's been 3 years. Why are you sad or crying? What can I do for you? And so I'm sure we can think of times when we probably
mhm,
said something similar. Like, can you
mhm.
mm,
remember a time when you said one of these or maybe something else?
mm,
Unfortunately, yes.
mm. Well,
Fortunately, yes. Hmm.
I've said some awkward things, but I recall. So there's a neighbor in our neighborhood. They lost their 2 year old son, and I remember her telling me that somebody had pulled that line, "God needed another angel," and just how
Hmm.
it just absolutely devastated them to the point, quite frankly, where they just want nothing to do with faith at this point. It was just
Hmm.
such a devastating thing to hear, and I don't doubt. maybe well intentioned, right? Awkward, well intentioned, but just, yeah, you have no idea how painful some of these words can be for people.
Hmm.
Yes,
Hmm.
and I've also seen others walk away from faith because of that question. Because I my
Mm-hmm.
response is, seriously, if that's the kind of God that will, intentionally rip my child from my life, then that's
Hmm.
not the God I want to serve. So we have to be very
Mm-hmm.
careful in terms
Yeah.
of what we say. We mean well, like, but the truth is we have to be really, really careful.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, what should people be saying instead,
Yeah.
even if it feels awkward?
Hmm. Statements like, so again, if the grief language is proficient, non-grievers could use phrases like, "This must be so hard for you." Very
Hmm.
validating.
Okay, yeah.
We miss John so much. We love John's laugh. He was the life of the party. You know that I'm a safe person for you to talk to about John. I want to remember him as well.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
John was such a giving person. I will think of some ways to honor him and give you to think about. I'm also very confused why this happened. I don't understand how you feel, but I'm here for you. Grief is
Hmm.
not linear. Grieve at your own pace. Grieve on your own terms. I'll reach out by text, respond when you can. I'll keep inviting you out. You say no until you can say yes. So those are just
Hmm.
some simple
Mm-hmm.
ways
Hmm.
of things that you can say as a non-griever to someone who has experienced loss.
Mm-hmm.
What I notice about that, Suzanne, is nothing about that list of things that you can offer is about doing. It's about being.
Being
Mm-hmm.
present. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's you mentioned the word validating, and it can be really hard because we don't know what to do. We feel helpless,
Mm-hmm.
we feel powerless.
Yes.
We don't want
Yes.
the person we care about to be in pain, so
Mm-hmm.
we have this tendency to want to move them along,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not what they need. It's
No.
so much harder, but absolutely necessary to sit in the suck, is one of my
Yes.
practitioners
Mm-hmm.
says.
Yes.
Just like that Job experience. It's like
Oh,
the best friend tore his clothes and sat there and said, not a thing, not a
Mm-hmm.
thing. And so
Mm-hmm.
correct.
sitting with that can be awkward, but sounds like it's incredibly necessary and powerful. Powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Best gift. It's the best gift.
Mm.
Yeah, that's great. I hope for our listeners that that's certainly really helpful for me, and I'm going to want to go back and listen to this
Mm-hmm.
episode myself next time I'm in a situation like that, because that was really helpful.
Very
Now,
practical.
yeah, yeah. You also draw on in your work Alan Wolfelt's six needs of mourning. Could you tell us about those and why having needs is different than, as we mentioned before, having like the stages of grief?
Absolutely. And so just to create a baseline, I'll just share what the needs were in a cursory way, and then I'll mention the stages so that we can do some comparisons. So, Alan Wolfelt has six needs of mourning. And so the first one is acknowledging the reality of death, embracing the pain of loss, remembering the person who died. And I'll just say quickly, this remembering involves allowing and encouraging yourself as a griever to pursue the relationship,
Mhm.
meaning adjusting to the loss of the daily routines, the calls, the chores, the shared things you did together, the meals, the texts, the hugs, and also to remember that your loved one was not defined by their death, but by their life. So that's really important. I wanted to highlight that today.
Mm,
The
mm,
fourth one is developing a sense of new identity, self-identity. The fifth one is searching for meaning, and the sixth one is to receive ongoing support. um, and I think when I compare these needs of mourning to the stages of grief, which was developed by Kubler-Ross, which is, linear. So first denial, second anger, third bargaining, fourth depression, five acceptance. These were developed for people who were palliative, not those who were left behind. So the stages in my mind are like a
mm,
placemat. It's like a label. And I found grievers over the years will slip into the label and they will feel, oh, or they've said, I feel I should give a label to, I should be in this stage. And you know what? They
Mm.
don't really know where they are. And the
mm,
truth is, as a griever, you can experience all of those things at
Mhm.
once, or it
Mhm.
could be all over the place. I remember when I sought Christian counseling after the loss of my son, because I felt like Job. The
Mm.
mm.
first question the counselor asked was, "So what stage of grief are you?" And I'm like, I don't do stages. I'm all over
Mhm.
the place. I'm actually
Mm,
seeking some support. And
Mhm.
so I think the needs of mourning are intrinsic to understanding the internal state of grief and mourning in a comprehensive way to sit with the post-loss state, to be present with the pain, adjust to what the relationship with your loved one is now, who
Mm.
you are now, what is your identity, explore the existential and then the whys and find community in which is a lifeline. Because the truth is, when your loved one died, the version of you also died with them. So you
Mhm.
are also now different, very, very different.
Mm.
And so I find that the needs guide grievers to go beyond the labels to gain a better understanding of the language of grief.
Mhm.
now I'm curious with those because this is such a different framework, and I like it. It's helpful. Does there tend to be one of these needs that people maybe skip or try to rush or try to ignore? Like, is there something about, yeah, one of these more difficult than the other kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, but my mind goes to need number four, which is developing a new self-identity. And
Mm.
I will say again, when that person died, the version of you that existed also died with them. So who are you now, and who are they to you post-loss? And that is really a tricky place to understand because the person is not present in body, but the truth is the relationship did not end with death. The
Mm,
relationship did not end with death. So I find that it takes a while for people to recognize that their loved one also lived because we tend to focus on the death and the death and the dying and what the death has caused. But the identity part is trying to reconcile and make sense of how you can have a different relationship post loss. And
Mm.
so, in my experience over the last 16 years, I've seen people rush through this identity, especially widowers. And here's what research has shown. Widowers, men, the males tend to replace, so they find a
mm,
partner, whereas
Mhm.
mm,
widows tend to integrate the loss. They integrate and to make sense of it. And now, some people, another part of that is some individuals, in terms of rushing, might sell their primary home within months of the loss as it's too
mm,
painful to stay in the home.
mm,
Mm.
So, are they rushing? It's hard to say because if that staying in the house is too distressing for them, then they're doing what they need to do to manage their stress.
mm,
Lastly, this piece arrives later for grievers. Coming back to the version of self, so new identity, grievers eventually land in that place of, oh my gosh, like who am I? I'm different. And they have to try to figure out, okay, what can I pursue? How can I recalibrate? How can I re-engineer my life? Who am I now? Looking at the roles, I'm no longer a wife. I'm no longer a husband. I'm no
Mm.
mm,
longer a sister. I'm no longer. So all these things come into finding out who your identity is. And I encourage grievers to tap into support groups and or therapy to help them make sense of the loss,
Mm.
especially with that need of mourning in developing a new identity.
mm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's
Wow.
really powerful. One of the imagery I saw in my more researching about grief is a grief roller coaster. And that's the
Hmm.
first
Mm,
time I came across that imagery. And that's very, having experienced grief and loss, it's very much that. You are all over the
Oh,
place. And
oh,
mm,
sometimes you just feel like you're hanging on for the ride because
yes.
it's so disorienting. So grief, very holistic, and it impacts every aspect of our lives, goes beyond the physical and emotional. You talk a lot about triggers being what we call somatic. So that's embodied in us is the grief. So what actually happens in the body when grief gets triggered, especially around the holidays?
So the truth is, the biggest culprit for everyday grief are triggers, right?
Mm,
But during the holidays, oh, they show up like a tsunami, right? Like,
mm,
that's
mm,
what I think. They come in like a tsunami. Triggers are experienced largely through the senses and the
mm,
body, automatically. They're rooted in that. And so the things that we enjoyed with our loved ones are often a big part of our grieving and mourning, more so during the holidays. So if you think of the senses, right? You hear a song,
Mm,
Signs of
mhm,
hearing. You might smell a candle or food or their perfume or cologne. That's the signs of smell.
mm,
Christmas decorations, movies, the empty chair or the empty room. That's the scene. Eating their favorite dish or pie or cake. That's the tasting. Wrapping a blanket that reminds you of them or a piece of
mm,
clothing
mhm,
or the empty chair. That's the signs of touch. And so triggers will override thoughts, shut
Mm.
down the prefrontal lobe in our brains, and immediately hijack our bodies. So here's how this works. Holidays bring up brief memories that
mm,
neuroscience found light up the same brain circuits that are linked to a serious threat. So the brain's amygdala, which is the brain's emotional center, I like to say smoke alarm, that
mhm,
sits in the limbic system, then immediately goes alert, alert, because it thinks that there's a threat. But what is happening? Your
Mm.
body is actually remembering the
mm,
things you shared with your loved one. So now you're
mm,
transported to the bottom brain or the reptilian brain, and fight or flight kicks in and
mm,
tries to
Mm.
protect you. So immediately, so the somatic symptoms could show up, and they
mm,
could be shortness of breath, heavy chest, feeling dizzy, feeling overwhelmed, crying, feeling foggy, feeling confused, headaches, being frozen, or feeling very claustrophobic. And
Mm.
so the moment that you were enjoying,
mm,
now
mhm,
it's very painful and you are hijacked by a memory. And
mm,
so if you think of the holidays, it could be, cooking, baking, carving a turkey. Some people, and this comes up a lot, are hijacked in the grocery store
Huh.
mm,
shopping for holidays. Lots of stories where people are, I was in the store shopping and I heard a song, or I reached for their favorite item off the
Mm.
shelf, and all of a
mm,
sudden
mhm,
I'm
mhm,
bawling. I couldn't function. I had to leave the store, sit in the car, and cry.
mm,
Again, brief triggers. So your body is remembering. And it's really important to remember that when that happens, sit with it.
mm,
Sit with it. Sit with what shows up. Breathe. Try to ground yourself. And and then eventually when you are able to, how can you make sense or
mm,
take the thing and make a memory of it?
Mm.
So I
mm,
think it's also important to remember that you're not falling apart. You're remembering
mm,
what
mhm,
you share with that person. You love deeply, so you will feel deeply. So when triggers take you out, because they will, sit
mm,
with them
Mm.
as a reminder as to how deep you loved your loved one. And I think it's important to be aware and
mm.
to know that if it happens, this is quite okay.
So I'm immediately thinking of two experiences I've had.
Mm-hmm.
One is more comforting now. So my mom has passed and it's been 24 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, but it's been
Mm-hmm.
24 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the comforting memory is scent oriented. So my
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
mom was Jamaican. She makes a traditional Jamaican black cake in the
Mm-hmm.
holidays. And so I have
Mm.
lots of memories of that, tasting that. And we've started to make the cake. It took some years, but we've started to make the cake, me and my children, which is also very meaningful, carrying on that legacy.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as I smell the nutmeg and the allspice, it's just like, ah, there
Mm.
she is.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
The other memory that I have or experience that I recently had was again scent oriented. I was in
Mm-hmm.
a somatic workshop,
Mm.
and the facilitator passed around some essential oils, and the one I took and smelled was one that was a rose. And
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm.
immediately took me back to the scent of my mom, which was her favorite scent, a tea rose
Mm.
perfume.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you talk about hijacked. I
Mm-hmm.
was undone,
Mm-hmm.
tears
Mm.
flowing uncontrollably, and I couldn't move. I just had to sit there and just let it
Mm-hmm.
like wash over me until I
Mm-hmm.
came
Mm.
back. But both very profound and just
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
triggered by just a scent.
Scent.
Very
Mm.
powerful.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Mm.
Again, the body remembers, right? The body remembers. And it's really important to note that, you can go quickly through the different brain regions in seconds, but it will
Mm-hmm.
always land in that fight or flight, or fawn or free. Like, you will
Mm,
always land there because your body is trying to protect you. But just
mm,
remember, you're remembering
mhm,
because you
mhm,
loved deeply.
Hmm.
mhm,
Now, this is really fascinating to me, the way the body remembers. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, we're recording this just over a week before Christmas, so we're
Mm-hmm.
right in the middle of holidays. What
Yes.
is it about the holidays that intensifies grief,
mm,
and
Mm-hmm.
what unrealistic expectations tend to make it worse? For Suzanne, for those grieving, what does maybe lowering expectations around the holidays maybe look like in real life?
mm,
Mm-hmm.
mm,
Yeah, the holidays, again, like Grace mentioned, it could be those special
Mm.
cakes or food that are linked to the holidays. The turkey, maybe your loved one was the one who, it was their pride and joy to cook the turkey and carve the
mm,
turkey, or
mhm,
maybe put decorations. But for grievers especially, and every day is hard for grievers, but the holidays compound the grief as they're reminders that your life as a griever has been changed forever,
mm,
largely
mhm,
because your loved one is not present to celebrate with you. And so for grievers, celebrating is, almost like a foreign concept. So, and we live
Mm.
in a world where everything is expected to be merry and bright, puts more pressure on
mm,
grievers, or they feel as if they don't have to, or they have to live up to the expectation. So over the holidays, I always encourage grievers to not feel pressured to live up to the expectation that they have to be happy or
Mm.
that they have to perform. I
mm,
always say show up at your capacity. You don't have to
mhm,
get through the holidays like you did when your loved one was present. It's
mhm,
Mm.
a very impossible feat. And usually grievers then mask and they push through. And eventually they land exhausted. They're sometimes resentful because
mm,
now they're doing things just because people expect them to. But you know what? Lower your expectations. So function at your capacity or your bandwidth, set
Mm.
realistic expectations. So that means you're going to either delegate, you're gonna change, like traditions. Maybe you don't have the capacity to wrap gifts. Just buy the
Mm.
gifts. Maybe order them online. Maybe
Mm.
send someone to pick them up, or send someone to pick up your groceries. If
mm,
you're
mhm,
hosting and you don't have to host, you can say no, because no is also a full statement. You
mhm,
can say, you know what, this year I don't have the capacity to host. Maybe someone else can host and I can visit. And
mhm,
Mm.
so
mhm,
those are just some of the ways to lower expectations. We'll get into a little bit later to the actual practices of navigating holiday
Mm.
grief.
Mm.
mhm.
Okay.
So you talked about the sort of feeling, the masking, the wanting to show up as happy or merry and bright. And so I think many grievers can feel guilty if they actually are laughing and enjoying themselves, especially after
Hmm.
a recent loss. So
Mm.
how do you help people hold the joy and the sorrow at the same time
Mm.
without feeling like they're betraying someone or
Hmm.
letting
Mm.
other family members stay down as well?
Mm.
Yeah, life in duality is life in grief. Life in
Mm,
Mm.
duality is life in grief. And so this comes as a part of reconciling the grief. If we understand that the past doesn't rob us of the ability to laugh or enjoy life, it has changed us for sure, right? Like, we've
mm,
lost a lot of dreams and future, but we are imprinted to hold all emotions, including happiness and joy. So sit with it. Sit with the guilt. Again, don't push it away. Sit with it. Be aware of its presence and speak to it by reminding yourself that you can also be happy and sad. It's
mm,
important to remember that you're not betraying your loved one by laughing and enjoying a
Mm.
moment. Embrace it, because guess what? Sadness will always show up. We also have to choose to embrace the laughter and the joy. Someone said micro joys are how we survive
Mm.
macro grief.
mm,
So
Ah.
micro joy, we could take in a sunset, a sunrise, a warm cup of tea, just sitting, warming your body, sitting by the water, watching the snowfall, just enjoying time with family and friends.
mm,
But life in
mhm,
duality embraces pain and sorrow, laughter and tears, joy and sadness. It's okay to carry both at the same time in grief, especially during the holidays. And someone
mm,
else said, I'll say this quickly, that we have to learn to embrace and celebrate the things our loved ones love the most because
Mm,
that will bring joy, that will bring smile to us, smiles to our faces. And they remember that death ends a life, but not the relationship. So we can learn as grievers to live in the
mhm.
sunshine of their life and not only in the dark shadow of their death.
Mm,
Mm.
mm.
I think you need
That's
to say
good.
that again, Suzanne.
Yeah, yeah.
So okay, so this statement I came across, and the griever said, we have to learn to live in the sunshine of their life
Mm,
and not in the dark shadow of their death.
Hmm.
mm,
Wow.
That is beautifully it beautifully captures duality.
Mm,
mhm, mhm,
Yep.
absolutely. Um, I wanted to piggyback on something I believe we talked about briefly last time, but I've been
Hmm.
thinking more about it. I think we talked briefly about how oftentimes a text or a note saying, "Hey, if there's anything you need, let me know." For somebody who's grieving, how that's not always a great question. But as I thought about it more, I realized that on the non-grieving end, it can sometimes be your sort of free ticket out. You sort of you sort of almost get this sense that, hey, me sending this is at least me doing the bare minimum. But in your head, you're kind of going, I know they're not going to respond because nobody ever responds to these kind of,
Hmm.
like it's so vague. So
mm.
when you're walking alongside someone who's grieving, what does actual helpful support look like? And why does that what do you need? Let me know kind of thing. Why is that a
Hmm.
wrong question and just not helpful?
Right. Is such is a vague question, number one. And for the griever, they're usually very lost, especially new in grief.
Hmm.
Very lost, very foggy. And remember, the world has fallen off its axis. So they don't know if they're coming or going, as my
Mm.
grandmother would
Hmm.
have said. And so they can't remember details. So instead of asking, what do you need? You can be practical. Say, hey, I'm going to cook a meal and drop off on Wednesdays. I'll drop it on the porch. I'll text you and I'll leave. You don't have to come out. There's no need to chat. Save your energy. You have now
Hmm.
given them permission not to have to talk because
Mm,
that's so
Right.
hard. A
Yeah.
tip with this is use disposable containers so grievers don't have to remember, okay, which dish belongs to
Hmm.
you? Very,
mhm,
very
mhm,
important. Another
mhm,
suggestion could be I'll pick up groceries on Tuesdays or Thursday or next week. Text me if you have a preference. If I don't hear from you, I'll drop it off on Wednesday, like whatever day you pick, right? You give them the
Hmm.
mm,
option, but if you don't hear back, I'll drop it off on this day so that
mm,
they are aware that you're dropping it off either way. Or
Hmm.
another practical way, I'll drive the kids to and from school 2 days a week. Let me know which two you prefer. Or
Hmm.
I'll take your vehicle to the car wash, put the keys in the mailbox on this day, and tip, fill it up with gas. Or,
mm,
Hmm.
you could shovel the snow. Or if
Hmm.
it's the summer, you cut the grass. Just show up and do that. Where you don't have to interact or engage the griever, but you're just doing something that will
Hmm.
help them. So those are just
Hmm.
some practical ways to show up for
Hmm.
those who are grieving. And coming back to something we said earlier, I always go by these three things: be present, listen compassionately, take your cues from them,
mm, mhm,
not
Hmm.
your agenda.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
Those are so helpful. I love all of those because it just sort of here's what's happening.
Hmm.
You don't need to interact with me because I even just think back to when we had kids, a sort of similar where you got a newborn in the house and you're like, I haven't showered in 2 days and I don't
Hmm.
feel like talking to anybody, right? And
Hmm.
it's
mhm,
just that little pressure of, hey, I'm popping by with the meal. It's like, oh no, I don't want to talk right now. It's
Yes.
just like so. Those
Yeah.
are super super helpful. Thank you for
mhm,
that.
mhm. We mentioned it briefly, but I thought it would be good to circle back because this is about theology and therapy.
Mm-hmm.
For people of faith, grief often raises hard questions about God. So, how do you talk to people about God in grief without rushing people towards the answers? Because we all want an
Oh,
answer. We fight with mystery. We just
oh,
can't.
oh. Yeah, and we really struggle with not knowing.
Mm,
And so I think I'll start by saying, again, be present, listen compassionately, and allow grievers to ask the hard questions. Don't have an agenda. So don't, it's not your job to fix, it's not your job to answer.
mm,
Just sit and don't spiritualize the answers.
Mm-hmm.
Individuals will seek to make sense of the loss. And as they do that, they question God, right? I remember my middle son, when my late husband passed, said, well, why did God heal that pastor that had colon cancer and didn't heal my dad?
Mm,
I was like,
mm,
whoa, okay. And my answer was simply, I don't know. I don't know why.
Mm.
Because the truth is, I don't know why.
mm,
Yeah.
I also had that question. And as I struggled to make sense of my late husband's passing, after thousands and thousands of people had prayed, a friend said to me, Suzanne, God healed him, but not in the way we wanted.
mm, mhm,
I
Mm.
was like, that for me was so freeing. And I
Mm.
have
mm,
to, the moment she said that, I immediately felt peace.
Mm.
mm,
I had
mhm,
to sit and wrap my head around it. But the truth is, that has also changed how I pray
Mm.
mm,
to this day. And
Mm.
so other questions, grievers might ask, well, did God allow them to die to save them from heartbreak? I don't know if I believe in God anymore because he didn't answer my prayer. And so this concept of questioning God has been taboo in faith and for
mm,
Mm.
generations. Because
mm,
I don't know about you guys, but culturally, we were taught you don't question God
Right.
ever. However, questioning God models transparency
Mm.
with God about our grief and disappointment with life. If we think questioning God helps our finite minds to make sense of the illogical, what doesn't
Mm.
make sense, and even though there may be lots of times that we will not get the answers that are pouring out, we're pouring out
mm,
questions,
mhm,
libations,
Mm.
will often give us release as we're questioning, as we're pouring out our grief. We actually release some of
mm,
that pain,
mhm,
and it allows us to process the unthinkable. And my mind goes to David in the Psalms. He questioned God all the time. I love
mhm,
David.
Mm.
Question
Mhm.
God. And for me, I love reading that. And
Mhm.
others have questioned God. Abraham, Sarah, Moses, Elijah. My favorite person, of course, is David. David
Mm.
felt quite forgotten. Uh, the popular person, though, is Job.
Mm.
mhm,
Mhm.
Did he question God? He sat. And as you mentioned earlier, Grace, look at his friends. His friends just sat with him in
mm,
silence. They
mhm,
didn't have an agenda. And sometimes it's okay in the space where we don't understand the whys. God, why did
mhm,
this happen? Why did you allow my loved one to pass? All the whys. It's okay to ask the question. Just
mhm,
like,
Mhm.
a child going to a dad and saying, but dad, I don't understand why you grounded me, or I don't understand
mhm,
why, whatever the whys are, it doesn't matter, right?
Mhm.
But we can come to God our Father and we can ask why, because
Mm.
he's that loving, that wants to comfort us. And so I say,
Mm.
question away.
Mhm.
mhm, mhm,
It's how we
Yeah, and
reconcile.
that's it's amazing to me that that gets lost in some traditions, given that we have the Psalms and
mhm,
books like Job. Like it's just very clear that that's a part of faith life. So
Hmm.
that's encouraging. I'm curious too. You made a comment at some point, maybe just in our conversation, that some grievers actually dread the new year more than the holidays. And
mhm,
I'm curious about that. Why would that be?
Hmm. Christmas and New Year's are really hard for grievers.
Mm.
Again, because you're sitting in the reality that your loved one is no longer here to celebrate with you. But the New Year's stands out as really hard.
mhm,
It can be very daunting as you stand at the beginning of a new year and you think, I hear lots of grievers say this all the time. I don't know how I will get through this year without, and they mention their loved one's name.
Mm.
mhm,
It is very hard, right? Because now you're standing with the thought and holding the fact that you now have to live through a whole year without the person in your life. And it's all the things you did together that we mentioned before
mhm,
that no longer be present for you to do. And then how can you as an individual get through life without this person? And so I always say to individuals who are supporting grievers, take one day at a time. Best
mhm,
response, take one day at a time. Sometimes one step at a time.
mhm,
Sometimes one
mhm,
second at a time. Sometimes 1 minute, 1 hour, but take one day at a time. Just put one foot in front of the other and do your best.
mhm,
Because, if you try to think of the year, of course, what's going to happen? Your body is going to become overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so the best thing, just keep it simple. Take one step at a time. And you can then assure them of ways you can be there for them. And but remember, whatever you say to individuals, show up. Remember, don't make an empty promises, show up. But
Mm-hmm.
it is very hard for grievers um to stand at the beginning of the new year and wonder. And so I think what I'll do now, I'll just jump in quickly and I'll share some practical ways for grievers to navigate Christmas and New Year's.
Okay.
So what we found, this is what I was told at the coping center when I started my grief journey as a new widow. And boy, I was so glad because it was like a roadmap. So when it actually happened, I thought, oh my gosh, this is what they meant. And so the days leading up to the day, so Christmas or New Year, or the other days too, like the date of the passing or their birthday or anniversary or whatever, the days leading up to are always, always harder than the day of. Always have a plan. Always have a plan. Even if you are flexible with that plan or the plan is not executed, always have a plan. Because the truth is, when you have a plan, it's a cognitive grounding, like making a list, right? Okay, so so on Christmas, I'm going to sleep in late, or on New Year's Eve, I'm going to choose not to do this, but you're going to make a plan, write it down, have a plan. Christmas and New Year's especially is a great time to look at traditions. How can you create new traditions that encompass the old traditions to help you make sense of life post loss? So if that, on New Year's Eve, you guys, the family had a particular tradition, how can that be adjusted? Or maybe how can you do something brand new? Some families actually go away for Christmas and New Year's because they can't stand to be in the home without their loved one. So that's an idea or example of how, a tradition is changed. Because you have to create your own grief footprint as you adjust to the holidays, Christmas and New Year's post-loss. Holidays, again, remember, Happy New Year. Holidays don't have to be happy and bright, right? They don't. They don't. It's okay because the rest of the world deserves to celebrate. However, your holidays don't have to be happy and bright. They have to be meaningful. So if your holidays are quiet, then make it meaningful. Don't feel it has to be happy, because guess what? And so since having experienced loss, I'm always intentional to say, have a meaningful Christmas, have a meaningful birthday, have a meaningful New Year, because whatever that is to you is meaningful, right?
Right.
If invited out, you get to decide if you will attend and how long you will stay. So you can say, okay, I'll arrive at 1 and I'll leave by 3, or I'll leave at 6. Here's a really important strategy. Park where you are not blocked in case you need to leave. A trigger shows up and you need to leave before the others. You want to be able to leave. So park where you are not blocked in. The other thing I would suggest, I normally suggest to people, is build a grounding toolkit. So things like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where you identify 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, that kind of thing. A butterfly tap, holding a warm cup of tea or coffee, looking through photos, going for a walk, doing deep breathing. A toolkit or toolbox is really important to help you know what to do should you be triggered and are feeling dysregulated. Self-care. Hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Drink water, electrolytes. Create moments for silence, because in the busyness of the holidays, Christmas and New Year's, sitting in silence is so important. Lighting a candle, again, looking through photos, going for a walk, those things are important. Be present with your grief. Be present with your feelings, cry if you have to, but you might also enjoy laughter. And again, don't feel guilty if you do. You're not betraying your loved one. Be self-compassionate. The next thing is remember your loved one. So customize an ornament, light a candle, customize a pillow, customize, a blanket. But do something that will help you embrace them in that holiday.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is plug into community, whether it's a faith community, a social community, and do that as your capacity allows. One thing that's helpful is to give back, whether it's you're, helping with the food bank or you're visiting someone that's in need, but give back. And after the holidays, rest, 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 rest.
Mm-hmm.
Big thing, don't perform. Find a safe connection that will allow you to be your authentic self. So someone or spaces where you don't have to mask, but you can just show up.
Mm-hmm.
Grief and
Yeah.
all, you can cry, you can laugh, you can do whatever, but seek safe, authentic connections. Because the holidays will always be celebrated globally, but you
Mm-hmm.
get to determine how you will celebrate this
Mm.
this holiday with a version of you and the memory of your loved one. Grief and the holidays are the intersection where you get ready for the festivities, but
Mm.
also sit with the emptiness that your loved one is no longer present. That's life in duality.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Wow. Yeah.
Really good stuff
Yeah.
here. Very
Mm.
practical things, Suzanne. We appreciate
Mm.
that. So I've got a final question for you. So you talked about grief being lifelong, right? There's no off ramp, there's no detour,
Mm.
like,
Mhm.
and that can feel overwhelming. So what
Hmm.
does living well with grief actually mean? What could that look like?
Oh, living well. So if we think of all the things we talked about, living well means grieving and mourning in healthy ways, and all the ways we talked about earlier,
Mm,
being aware of how you can attend to your grief, right? So grief meaning the inward experience, your thoughts and your emotions that affect you mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually in a healthy way, and also attending to the needs of mourning. So mourning again is the external expression of grief. So doing the work of grief and mourning will
mm,
help grievers to integrate the loss, to recalibrate, to find new meaning of in life.
Mm.
And as non-grievers learn the language of grief and become proficient,
mm,
Mhm.
mhm,
then non-grievers and grievers can both live out that language proficiency well, which means that grievers can live well because they're supported well.
Mm.
mhm,
Suzanne, this has been a tremendous gift, I think, to our listeners to just hear from you. And there's so much good content here. Can't wait to get this out to people and to those of us who listen in regularly here. If you know someone grieving or someone who's grief adjacent right now, like just getting this episode to them, there's just so much good wisdom
mhm.
and practical tips here as well. So
Mhm.
I want to thank you, Suzanne, for coming on and giving us so much for our listeners. I really appreciate it.
Yes,
You are
thank you,
welcome.
Suzanne. Thank you so
You are
much for
welcome.
being here.
Thank you. It's
Mhm.
always good to give back.
Mm.
Yeah, this is one of my passions. So thank you for
Mm.
having me.
Mm.
Wonderful. And for our listeners, we will see you sometime in the new year. Grace and I are going to take a little break from Sacred Sofa over the holidays, but we'll see you sometime in the new year.
And everyone, have a meaningful Christmas and a meaningful New Year.
Amen.
Amen.
Take care.